It was a bright, cheerful afternoon when my stepbrother, Josh, arrived at our home. He had come to stay with us for 30 days, a visit that seemed straightforward and ordinary at first glance. Josh was 2 years older than me, tall and self-assured, with an aura that made people naturally gravitate toward him. Growing up, our relationship had been distant. Our families blended when our parents married, but since we lived in different cities, we barely got to know each other. Now, here he was, settling into the room next to mine for what would turn out to be an unforgettable month. I've always been a private person. Sharing my inner world never came easily to me. By the age of 24, I had embraced a lifestyle centered on solitude and self-reliance. I took pride in knowing myself, my preferences, my fears, and the little routines that made my days feel complete. My life felt calm, predictable, and under control, and that's just the way I liked it. During high school, my perspective on relationships had been shaped by the usual teenage curiosity. I experienced fleeting crushes, the thrill of a secret note passed in class, or the anticipation of seeing someone special between lessons. It was all very innocent and fleeting. But my time at an all-girls boarding school changed things profoundly. Boarding school had initially seemed like it might be stifling, no boys, no distractions, but I soon realized the absence of romantic dynamics created space for unexpected growth. Without the complications of crushes or relationships, I could focus on friendships and personal exploration. The friendships I made were deep and meaningful, and they shaped my understanding of myself in ways I hadn't anticipated. One of the most surprising discoveries during that time came in the form of self-exploration. Some of my friends openly shared their experiences with personal comfort objects, tools they described as sources of relaxation and self-care. First, I was hesitant and unsure. It felt like venturing into uncharted territory, but curiosity is a powerful force. And eventually, I decided to see what it was all about. The first time I tried, I was filled with nerves and uncertainty, but as I let go of my apprehensions and allowed myself to fully experience the moment, I was astounded. It wasn't just good, it was transformative. The sensation was deeply satisfying, offering a sense of calm and contentment that I hadn't known was possible. That moment became a turning point, a quiet revelation about my capacity to create happiness for myself, without depending on external validation or relationships. From then on, I embraced this newfound source of comfort as my own. It wasn't something I discussed or shared. It was private, a deeply personal part of my life that belonged solely to me. The need for romantic relationships diminished significantly. I saw the chaos they often brought: friends' heartbreaks, dramatic arguments, and complicated breakups, and I knew I wanted none of it. My solitude became my sanctuary, a place where I could find peace and joy without compromise. Post-boarding school, I carried this independence into adulthood. My life revolved around simple pleasures, reading novels in the quiet evenings, immersing myself in music, or simply enjoying my own thoughts. I valued the clarity and freedom that came with not having to explain or justify my choices to anyone. My world was small but full, a treasure chest of little moments that brought me contentment. This sense of privacy became a cornerstone of my identity. I guarded my secrets with care, knowing that sharing them might invite misunderstanding or judgment. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. My decisions, my habits, they were mine alone, and that was all that mattered. Living on my terms brought a kind of liberation that I cherished deeply. When Josh moved in, his presence disrupted this balance in subtle but undeniable ways. His charm and humor quickly endeared him to my mother, who treated him as her own. For me, though, his arrival was unsettling. I wasn't used to having a male figure in the house, especially someone so vibrant and sociable. I kept my distance, hoping the month would pass uneventfully. But as the days went by, I began noticing things about Josh that didn't sit well with me. First, they were small, fleeting glances from across the room or a slightly lingering smile. I dismissed them, chalking them up to my own overactive imagination. But his behavior became more deliberate, harder to ignore. Josh started finding excuses to be close to me. During family movie nights, he would sit uncomfortably near, his presence impossible to overlook. In the kitchen, he often stood just a bit too close, his movements calculated to invade my personal space. These interactions left me feeling uneasy, a growing knot of discomfort that I couldn't quite explain away. One evening, while preparing dinner, I felt his presence behind me, too close, too intentional. My instincts screamed that this wasn't normal, but I was torn between confronting him and avoiding unnecessary conflict. It became clear that his intentions weren't as innocent as they should have been. This unexpected dynamic forced me to confront not only Josh, but also my tightly guarded sense of security. His presence in my space challenged the boundaries I had spent years building. It tested my ability to protect the private life I held so dear, a life that had always been enough until now. Every time he brushed against me while reaching for something, a jolt of unease ran through me. My heart raced uncontrollably, and I would find my muscles tensing before I even realized it. It felt involuntary, like my body was warning me about something my mind hadn't fully grasped yet. I struggled to make sense of it. Was it an accident, coincidence, or something more deliberate? I wanted to hold on to my faith in people, to believe that his actions weren't intentional, but his persistent presence around me felt unnatural. The way he lingered close enough to invade my personal space sent my instincts into overdrive, even as I tried to rationalize his behavior. One evening, I sought refuge in my room, shutting the door behind me in a desperate attempt to find some peace. The day had been exhausting, and I needed a moment alone to gather my thoughts. But as I sat on the bed, the faintest sound from outside the door made me glance up. Through the small gap where the door didn't fully close, I saw him. He was standing there still, silent, and unnervingly patient. My breath hitched. He wasn't knocking, calling my name, or even pretending to have a reason to be there. He was just waiting. Why? What did he want? My mind spiraled with unanswered questions, each one more unsettling than the last. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe he was adjusting to living with us, and this was just part of his personality. Perhaps he didn't understand boundaries. Yet, the unease refused to dissipate. Every glance, every movement felt calculated, deliberate, as if he was testing how far he could push before I reacted. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite articulate it. As the days passed, the discomfort grew more pronounced. It wasn't just the physical proximity that bothered me. It was the feeling that his presence carried an unspoken weight. I began questioning my own emotions. Was I imagining this? Was I being paranoid? Or was there truly something sinister in the way he observed me? His eyes lingering a second too long, his steps always a little too close. The breaking point came one evening when my parents left for a dinner party, leaving just the two of us in the house. The thought of being alone with him set my nerves on edge. I retreated to my room, determined to keep my distance. Closing the door felt like erecting a fragile barrier between us, a shield that I hoped would keep him away. The house was eerily quiet without my parents. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed louder in the stillness, amplifying my anxiety. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, willing my mind to quiet down. Yet, the tension remained, a relentless knot in my chest that refused to loosen. In moments like these, I turned to a secret source of comfort, an object I'd cherished for years. It was a small, seemingly insignificant item, but it held immense value for me. It was my escape, my solace, something that could ground me when the world felt too overwhelming. On that night, its familiar presence was more vital than ever. As I held it in my hands, its texture and weight brought a sense of calm. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation, letting it transport me to a place of peace. For a brief moment, I felt the tension begin to ease, the worry slipping away. But that relief was short-lived. A faint sound jolted me from my thoughts. I froze, straining to hear. Was it just the house settling? Or was it something else? My pulse quickened as I opened my eyes and scanned the room, every nerve on edge. And then it happened. The door swung open with a suddenness that made my heart stop. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was Josh. His expression was a mix of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite place but which made my stomach churn. "I knocked," he said, his voice low and disturbingly calm. "You didn't answer." I scrambled to pull the blanket over myself, my hands trembling as I tried to shield myself from his gaze. My face burned with a mix of fear, anger, and utter humiliation. "Get out," I shouted, my voice breaking under the weight of my emotions. But he didn't leave. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorframe, his arms crossing over his chest as a smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. That smirk, it was chilling. It wasn't the kind of smile that conveyed friendliness or humor. It was calculated, mocking, as if he enjoyed watching me squirm. "I didn't know you were into that," he said, his tone smooth and cutting, each word laced with derision. The insinuation in his voice made my blood run cold. I could feel my body trembling, the weight of his words hitting me like a physical blow. His amusement was palpable, and it made me realize something that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't an accident. He had planned this. Every action, every step, every lingering glance had led to this moment. "Josh, leave," I repeated, my voice now louder, trembling with a mix of fury and panic. My hands clenched the blanket tighter, as if it could somehow shield me from the overwhelming presence he exuded. It was as though his very being had the power to strip me bare, to expose every vulnerability I tried so desperately to keep hidden. My heart raced, thumping painfully against my ribs, as my body trembled uncontrollably under the weight of the moment. I felt trapped, like an animal in a cage, unable to breathe, unable to think, paralyzed by the crushing fear that wrapped itself around me. But he didn't listen. No, instead of backing away, he stepped closer, ignoring every desperate word I had said, as if they were nothing more than the faintest whisper in the wind. His presence was suffocating, pressing in on me, and I could feel every inch of my skin screaming for space, for safety. My heartbeat quickened as he continued to close the gap between us. His voice, when it came, was disturbingly smooth, too calm, almost like he was coaxing me. "You don't have to hide from me. We're adults. You know, I can help you if you want." There was an unsettling edge to his words, something not entirely kind, but laced with a quiet, confident control. And yet, there was something darker beneath it, something that I couldn't quite place. But that set my instincts on high alert. I felt the walls of my room closing in around me, the air thick with tension, growing colder by the second. His words hung in the air like poison, carrying a weight that felt suffocating, as though I couldn't escape them no matter how hard I tried. The sense of powerlessness gnawed at me, my hands clenched into fists beneath the blanket, and I could feel my body shaking more violently now. Why was he doing this to me? What did he want from me? The questions ran through my mind in a dizzying whirl, but I couldn't answer them. My thoughts were clouded with fear, shame, and confusion, and they twisted around each other until I couldn't tell where one emotion ended and the next began. He chuckled softly, a low sound that made my skin crawl, and then finally he turned, walking out of the room. As he did, he left the door slightly ajar, as if daring me to close it, daring me to make some kind of choice. I sat there, trembling, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or more terrified. The following days were a blur of tension and avoidance. I did everything I could to steer clear of Josh. But he didn't make it easy. He seemed to take pleasure in tormenting me, in making me uncomfortable. Whenever we were alone, he would drop suggestive comments, his voice light, but the words sharp, designed to get a rise out of me. It was as if he reveled in watching me squirm, in knowing that I couldn't escape his presence. I hated it, but at the same time, I couldn't deny that there was a strange thrill that flickered inside me every time he teased me. I fought against it, tried to suppress it, but the pull of his attention was undeniable. I told myself it was wrong, that I shouldn't let myself be affected, but it was so much harder than I expected. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filled my room with its soft glow, something inside me shifted. I was sitting on my bed, gazing absently at the way the sunlight danced across the wooden floor, when an unexpected thought crossed my mind. What if I left the door open tonight? I hesitated for a moment, uncertainty tugging at me, felt reckless, dangerous even, but something deep within me, some unspoken desire was pushing me forward. I glanced at the door, the thought gnawing at me, and remembered how much I longed to experience him again, how much I yearned for that connection, to feel close to him once more. My heart raced as the idea took root, and before I could stop myself, I slowly pushed the door open just a crack. A cool breeze filtered in from the hallway, brushing against my skin, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, the scent drifting in from the garden outside, and I inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I told myself it would be fine, that I could handle it, that this was something I wanted, something I needed to feel again. I waited, my hands trembling as the minutes stretched on, each second dragging as I listened intently to the quiet sounds of the house, the faint chirping of birds outside, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Everything seemed muted, distant, as if the world outside had faded away. Then, I heard footsteps. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. This was the moment. My body went still, and I closed my eyes, holding my breath as I waited. When I opened them again, he was there, his figure barely visible in the dim light of the room, his presence filling the space. His voice was soft, low, like a whisper carried on the wind. He stepped into the room, the sound of his footsteps barely audible on the creaky wooden floor. The air around him seemed to hum with electricity, and I felt his presence as though he was right beside me. Even though there was a space between us, a shiver ran down my spine, but I didn't pull away. No, instead, I leaned into it, letting the warmth of his proximity surround me like a heavy blanket. I could feel his warmth radiating from him, even though there was no physical touch yet. It was intoxicating, pulling me in, and I found myself helpless against it. My heart thudded in my chest, and I let myself lose all the fears, the doubts, the questions I had been battling. The moment took over, and I gave in to it. To him, it felt like a sweet surrender, like tasting something I had long desired but had been too afraid to reach for. My mind buzzed with a strange sense of peace, yet excitement thrummed beneath the surface. It was both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time, like experiencing something magical for the first time and realizing you couldn't ever go back. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about something deeper, something more profound: trust, desire, the magnetic pull between two people. It was about connection, about letting go of everything else and simply being in the moment. I could still feel him close to me, his presence solid, unshakable, and it was everything I had hoped for. For that brief moment, everything felt right. It felt like the world had paused, like time itself had slowed, and I was exactly where I needed to be. Thank you for taking the time to watch our videos. If you find the content useful and interesting, don't forget to like, share, and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Our channel will always update attractive, inspiring, and useful content for you. Click the bell icon to receive notifications as soon as there are new videos. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to continue to develop. Thank you and see you in the next videos.